This very important figure in Masonry, Jacques de Molay. And he was a major figure in the Crusades, and he's pictured in other places with his giant red cross on a white field, like many of those Crusaders have. And interestingly enough, he was killed on Friday the 13th. Yeah. The death of Jacques de Molay is being depicted. He's being burned on a pyre.
Hey guys, welcome back to Edge of Wonder with our very incredible guest, Joaquin, the insider on the Freemason.
Who I'm calling the Masonic Mystery Man. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, guys. Great to be here.
For those of us outside that are looking in and researching this stuff, right? I'm just going to kind of ramble off a couple of things, which is, one is, you know, he was the head of the Knights Templar at the time. Right, and yes, was it King Philip? Yeah, just burned this guy and wiped out a bunch of the Masons and stuff like that, because they were accused of Luciferianism,
worshiping Baphomet,
worshiping, you know, some really dark stuff, and you know, the Masons seem to believe that this guy, as you said, is some kind of like figure, you know, and they even have little subsects, even young sects of the Masonries. Or of these sister lodges or something, where it's almost this strange worship of this guy, and how on the inside he's certainly revered, right? Is this Luciferian thing even discussed? Is the word Illuminati used within these lodges the way that they're used and looked at from outside? Because the Masons seem to be this group that really, if you were to say, okay, here's the Illuminati, you would actually, the first thing you would think of is the Masons and the Masonic Lodge, because throughout history, they were tied to the Illuminati, especially at their birth. And Dumoulin is just this like,
and Adam Weishaupt kind of combined these two things, right, kind of together.
Adam Weishaupt is much less discussed in Masonry. The term Illuminati is not directly used except in books that are very topical, that seem to be giving a historical approach of how this society is related to the other one. The term that is sort of used or is repeated internally and even appears in some other ways is hierarchy. And you have these concepts which do seem to originate from Hermeticism and other mystery religions through time, things like the winding stair, also that checked floor, right? So those symbols are used extensively.
They always try to tie this to the Tai Chi somehow, but it's like not affiliated at all. But basically, like the black and the white, the two sides of the coin, you know, the two opposing forces kind of thing within Hermeticism, right? That's kind of what, when you're researching from the outside, that's what they're talking about.
They use those symbols extensively, and a lot of people know that we refer to, it's interesting to note, two things are forbidden to be talked about in a lodge while it's in session.
Frosted Flakes, and what else? I'm just kidding.
Yes, there's no mention of Frosted Flakes. It's totally off limits. Politics and religion. Those two topics are not to be discussed in the formal context among brothers because they bring division among brothers. One of the things you got to understand is Masons, through all the ritual work, through all the degrees, through all the pageantry of the lodge opening and closing, are loyal to each other, really in the absolute, and loyal not only to each other, but to keeping each other's secrets and to keeping each other's reputation, you might say. In Masonry, we have this principle called the heal and conceal. And what this means is you have a what they call a brotherly obligation to the best of your ability. You know, you don't have to go broke or die in the process yourself, but to the best of your ability, you should help a fellow brother in distress. So if their family's going through financial hardship or whatever, most of these guys are not anywhere near that, but you know, if they were, you'd have an obligation to try and help them to the best of your ability. That's the heal part. The second part, the conceal, the way it's explained is like you are to make it seem or to cover for that person as if they never had hardship. So you're helping them not only recover from whatever it was that afflicted them, but help them save public face, for lack of a better word, so that other notable families don't see them as being weak or having any kind of problem. You know, so you're called on to you protect each other. It really is, in the fullest sense of the word, it's a good old boys club.
I feel like I'm watching a National Geographic like animal documentary, or like an Animal Planet animal documentary where you're describing like a group of, you know,
Seriously.
animals and how they treat one another. It's really bizarre, actually.
Here's another interesting fact. There's a beautiful saying in Masonry that in Masonry all brothers are equal, and in a lodge even the king may take a low seat. And this is an extremely interesting concept. Masons have a rotating chairmanship, as it were, called the Master of the Lodge, and you rotate over the course of several years, often through different stations of the lodge, with many brothers ultimately sitting as Master of the Lodge over time. But when you're in lodge, your outside rank, which you might use if you're at a fancy dinner party and you enter the room based on your rank.
So in other words, if you're a president or something.
Yeah, if you're a
Prince, if you're a marquis, none of that precedence happens in the lodge. Only Masonic rank counts in the lodge. So you could literally be, you know, a low-ranking Mason and be the Duke of Wales, right? Whatever, and you wouldn't have the same precedence accorded to you in the lodge, because only Masonic rank is counted when the lodge is in session.
We call each other by number, not by name. Carlin's number 14, I'm number 12. Burnsy's number 29.
You outrank Mr. Burns here?
Sure, watch. Hey, 29, get out of here! Rah, rah.
Thank you, sir. May I have another?
Ooh.
Patience, Monty. Climb the ladder.
So this is an extremely interesting principle, and I do find a lot of these guys, a lot of the big shots, Wall Street big shots, or whoever that I met and have now some, you know, pretty good friends arising from this, they will let down their guard in the Masonic Lodge for this reason, because it feels comfortable, it feels brotherly, and it feels like you're just able to share with one another without all that outside pressure, and you know, you don't have women distracting you, right? You know, that can take some competitive pressure off of men at times, you know. And you, from the outside, if you're looking at, you know, some of the nefarious things attributed to Masonry over time, you know, you would think all these guys are the Ubermensch or something, that they never suffer, that they never have hardship, or, you know, but they do. They have emotional tribulations, they have other tribulations. They might be wealthier than the average person, but they're still people, and you know, they do have this side which you don't see them portray in public for all kinds of reasons.
So I'm going to guess that because of that, some people have come up to you and said some pretty weird things, right?
For sure. I mean, I had a guy directly tell me, and this sounds like, you know, it sounds like it's some kind of intentional leak or some, you know, funny thing that you would hear on Edge of Wonder, or you know, but he literally told me, he said, and he was a little tipsy at the time. He had had a few beers in him from our convocation, you know. He directly told me this: in a Wall Street firm, you cannot rise above a certain level of management unless you are Austro-Hungarian Jew. He was kind of complaining about it, you could say, like, because he was in finance. He wasn't Austro-Hungarian, and so he was kind of like, this BS system, kind of, so to speak, which is funny. There definitely was, I had some good friends in the lodge who were Jewish, extremely wealthy. I know from casual conversation, knew the Koch brothers personally. They knew all of these people. And they're just in that circle. People complain about how college admissions are no longer based on merit. It's based on like payola, basically complaining that their kids can't get into Harvard anymore because too many people are bribing their way in or whatever.
Too much Chinese influence there.
Some of them even are aware of the fact that they had to limit the number of Asians at certain of these schools and actually put a quota on it, or otherwise there would be, the entire school would be Asian based on your actual qualifications. But so another interesting thing, speaking of the Asian topic, in order to be a Mason, interestingly enough, and they ask you this when they come to your house, they say, are you a communist? And you cannot answer yes, because only a theist, only someone who believes in a higher power is allowed to be a Mason. So communists de facto are disallowed because they're atheists. However, I know for a fact that in the Acacia Club, which is the Chinese men's lounge of Masonry, so to speak, there are, in fact, some pretty high-ranking communists. Now, I don't know if you follow this thread, but there's this author, Richard Wurmbrand, who says that high-level communists are not atheists. They're something else. So they do believe in a higher power. Just if you follow...
Yeah, like you're thinking more of the darker satanic aspect of things, correct?
You could put it that way. Okay.
Man, I have like a lot of questions. Well, one, is there anything else that people have told you that just like blew your mind?
And I don't know how this stuff even comes up in casual conversation, but it's just like some of these people are so excited about it, they sort of can't contain themselves. I forget how it got started, but all kinds of topics are discussed around business or other things. And when men get going, it's always history and logic and technology and cool stuff, right? So he was saying that not sure who exactly that was, I believe this person worked for or had something to do, maybe was an investor in Rand Corporation. Rand and or Lockheed Martin, I think those two are somehow related, but in any case, he said, we now have a train that can dig its own tunnel. The way he described it, it's like a train fitted with an extremely high power laser on the front of it, or an array of lasers, that can dustify, some people may be familiar with this theory, out of 9/11, but it can dustify dirt or rock or anything. It can turn it into like a fine powder, and so essentially no track or tunnel has to be laid in advance. The train can just burrow, so to speak, like a mole might burrow, and so you can dig as many underground tunnels as you want. And you're already in the train, so you're riding in it like a passenger might ride a condor or something, and you're just burrowing under the ground.
How fast though? And like, where would you go?
He just says, we now have this thing, and I'm like, oh, that's fascinating. It's almost like some of these people, like, they can't bear to really not talk about it because it's just so cool, It was this kind of feeling, it wasn't like I'm meeting the guy behind in the alley and put the money envelope and he gives me the goods. He's just kind of like wanted to kind of tell me, like, as if he's like a kid in a candy store. Like, we have this thing, check this out, and it's funny because, these guys, I mean, they do, these huge funds, they're in defense, they're in all kinds of stuff, so they know what's going on, they know tangentially probably all kinds of stuff. I'll go back to the library thing for a second. Here's the mind-blowing thing. There's a book in this library by John Dewey, and I forget the title, I apologize, I can't remember the exact title, but when I read it, it was basically a book about occult numerology. John Dewey was literally an occult numerologist who spent apparently a large portion of his life researching numbers and had recorded his thoughts on the subject in this book about occult numerology and what all the numbers meant and how you could manipulate them and add them up and learn things about the universe and just all kinds of, people who are into sacred geometry would probably love this book or whatever. But, it's like, these were like his theories, And my explanation for why these books are so hidden from the public, again, I didn't find something like, oh, here's, plan for world domination in the Masonic library, but these are topics, a lot of them occult topics or what have you, numerology, astrology. There's a bunch of books about astrology and finance. Like, find that section in your local library, the astrology/finance section, right, where they basically, for lack of a better word, are discussing their pet theories on how to apply, it's like applied astrology as it applies to finance. And my only explanation for this is that these men, these high public figures in their lifetimes, were into these subjects casually and wanted to write books about them and share them as giddy intellectuals get. If you ever worked with college professors or whatever, they just can't wait to tell you their new theory and give advice, right? So it's like they wrote these books knowing full well that they dare not publish them in public to a largely, Christian world at that time, who would immediately find these subjects to be totally
bonkers.
There is actually a Masonic publishing house which publishes exclusively Masonic books and their reprints. This company does not carry these books in their catalog because I looked, but they carry a lot of other Masonic titles. I can't even find these books on any kind of internet search or in any other library, and I've tried. But anyways, these books exist. I have seen them. I have held them. I'm absolutely sure of their existence. That's all I can give you, really. But basically, these guys were interested in these topics. They knew they were untouchable in society, but they wanted to publish them internally for maybe no other reason that their peers in the social circle, in the investment world or whatever, could look at it and say, wow, that's an interesting theory, I ought to try that out, kind of thing. Because from the outside, these things are like big conspiracy, but this is the world that these guys deal with every day. They deal with investment, they deal with managing people, and I do think from the tone of some of these books, especially Albert Pike and Ledbetter, they do kind of, for lack of a better word, get off on this idea of kind of playing God, manifesting this kind of authority in the human world, and their megalomania or whatever, they just want to write about it, and discuss their pet theory of how you can, essentially manipulate or know this kind of stuff. And again, I don't believe that this stuff is absolute or even absolutely works, but it doesn't stop these people from trying. It's just like our government doing constant experiments with weather, It may not actually work, but they're gonna try it. They're gonna try to do it, because if they succeed, well, nothing like being able to time an economic cycle.
Well, and be able to tell everyone, hey, I controlled the weather.
Funny enough, I didn't read the whole book because I was just, kind of browsing at the time. I didn't even know this book existed, so I wasn't planning on reading the whole thing because I only had like a couple hours that day to be in there. Near as I can tell from my light consumption of this book, if someone has read it, you can correct me, but he basically wanted to number things in a fashion that suited his thinking. I don't know what he was really cooked up on or thinking he was doing by renumbering everything, but I remember, because I've also studied the Bible extensively. I'm an ex-Catholic, went to a number of Catholic institutions, and I've actually read the Bible from cover to cover, mostly the King James Bible, even though that's not the one that's used in Catholicism. That was my personal favorite Bible. you have the book of Numbers for one thing, you have Deuteronomy, you have these other books, and one of the things that seems to be a theme in the Bible is that the number in which things are given is fairly important, and that it comes from the divine, it comes from God, right? So in my understanding of esoteric theory, and I'm again no advanced adept or anything at this, but when you renumber something, it essentially changes its correspondence, or can alter it on Earth and maybe in other ways. If you talk about something like 440 and 432, right? When you change that frequency, something else happens, or a different effect is produced. So I can only think by literally renumbering and reordering all the subjects for people to learn everywhere, and every school child being taught this. I have no idea, but it might have some effect on their mind's perception of those subjects, or on the weight, esoteric or otherwise, of those subjects. Because numbers are important in the universe, in physics, they just kind of are. So for whatever reason, he set out to do this, and he was, for lack of a better term, an occult numerologist.
I'm just, like, hearing you speak about this, I'm very curious what 666 represents now in the Dewey Decimal System. So
The Dewey Donkey System.
The Dewey Donkey System?
Interestingly enough, 666 doesn't really come up that much in Masonry. It's not symbolically anywhere. It's not. More so numbers that come up are 3rd, 33rd. Multiples of 3 are very important. 9th degree, 12th degree, 18th degree Freemasonry. These are all degree numbers. There are no degrees in between those degrees. Again, when you look at how Masonry represents God, one of the interesting things when you take your oath, Masonic oath, which you take on an altar, above an altar, on a holy book of your choice. The holy books you can use are limited to the Orthodox religions: Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Buddhism.
They consider Islam an Orthodox religion in Masonry?
Yes, they do. Yes, they do. You can use the Quran, but you can't use, for instance, the Kebra Nagas that the Rastafarians use, or whatever is used by Santeria or whatever. You can't use those books because they're not considered Orthodox. But the Quran is considered Orthodox by Masonry. You take your oath upon the book, just like any person taking a public office would take an oath, right? Pretty standard format, really. When you refer to their concept of a divine being, because it kind of as a nod to different brothers having different beliefs, the term they use is to go to, or the grand architect of the universe. Many Christian scholars over the years have asserted this does not at all refer to the Christian God, and maybe the deist God, or the so-called God of nature, which some people accuse Jefferson of using in the founding documents of the country or whatsoever, as Springmeyer asserts in his book. All I can say is it's not made explicit. It's almost like a blank slate in which you can project your own image of God onto. He's just symbolized by a G in Masonry. There's a large G, this to go to, as I say, the grand architect of the universe, because everything in Masonry is about architecture, right? The whole concept of Masonry is architecture and building. Okay, what is an entered apprentice mason? Someone who gathers rough stones in a quarry. What is a fellow craft mason? Someone who smooths those rough stones for the master mason's use. What is a master mason? Someone who lays those stones for the master of the lodge to lay his ground drafts upon. This is the symbology that's used in masonry, and it's how you wear your apron and other signs and symbols denote your rank. And it is a mason's apron. It's the apron of a stone cutter. So the famous Simpsons episode of the stone cutters, right, was all a reference to that.
Well, I didn't realize you were a member.
As were Nick Cage's comments in the movie, about masonry.
Of the National Treasure or whatever?
That's the one. And the person, I'll tell you this much, without getting too into it, the person who wrote that movie definitely, I would say, had to be a Mason, or if they weren't, they were a very good Masonic scholar, because a lot of the references were pretty spot on. And the language used was playfully not the actual language, but was very close to it, so that if a Mason watched that movie, they get a whole nother layer of inside jokes out of that movie, because there were a bunch. And Cage's character himself uttered a lot of them, actually.
You know, the Templars and the Freemasons believed that the treasure was too great for any one man to have, not even a king. That's why they went to such lengths to keep it hidden.
That's right.
What level did you reach? And
I'm a Master Mason. Now, because of my bloodline, which I won't get into directly because
It'll give you away.
I'm eligible for the highest levels of Masonry, including, as I'm to understand it, pretty much any level I want. I'm eligible for the Society of Cincinnati. There's different kinds of clubs that, Sons and Daughters of the Revolution, for one thing. This concept, I cannot tell you enough how important this is to Masons. Bloodline is extremely important. They said I could join the Knights Templar. They said I could join the Mystic Temple of the Shrine. I could, if I chose, I could now go and become a 33rd degree Master Mason. I did not want to do that, even though I was told by higher ranking Masons that it's just a play. It's just a play.
What do you have to do to become a 33rd degree Mason? Other than skin a cat?
I don't know, because I didn't do it.
I see.
I can tell you what I had to do in not so many words, because this part really is the so-called secrets of Masonry, which I have taken an oath not to reveal, and there's no point of me revealing it to the audience anyways, unless the person plans to infiltrate Masonry, which is the exact signs and the words of the ritual. Those are the secrets of Masonry, and they're unintelligible to a layperson anyway, so I won't get into those.
Latin? Or a more ancient language?
They can be used in English if you want. I will tell you that Holland Lodge number 8 conducts some of their ceremonies or rituals. They conduct them in Low Dutch. Low Dutch is an old language that hardly anyone speaks. Those of you who may know that before it was New York, it was New Amsterdam.
Right.
I think that has something to do with it. All these financial titans. And still today, whole ceremonies, whole assemblies of the lodge, and I've personally witnessed this, conducted in Low Dutch. I'm like, y'all just hedge fund managers all speaking Low Dutch, and I guess I'm just not going to the right parties. Like, I don't know, y'all still know how to speak this, and here we are, kind of half naked, this candlelight, and everyone's speaking in Low Dutch, It doesn't, you just have to pause for a second, because an ordinary person would be like, oh God, get me out of there, But here it was, and that's the ritual work of Masonry. It is some of it conducted in candlelight.
Half naked, as you said.
There are times, especially when you're joining, you go through what amounts to a pretty heavy-duty fraternity hazing ritual, which is a little bit painful. I'll just describe it similar to like the, those guys in the Airborne, Army Airborne, when they get their pin put on directly with the steel. There's some elements of that in Masonry.
Hazing in fraternities and colleges comes from
this.
Really?
Yeah, I believe so.
yeah, I had that feeling for a while.
There's interesting things, like when you go through the ritual, if people know about different esoteric practices where you cannot have metals on you, gold, silver, etc., because they will interfere with the energy. You also take those items off during Masonic ritual. Rings, coins, etc. are temporarily placed aside.
That is interesting, because I would imagine the gold would have been a conductor for that energy, not something that they would want to put aside.
Yeah, but what energy?
All right, guys, that's all we have time for right now. And check out our next episode with our Freemason Insider coming soon
On Edge of Wonder.
Right?
So there's three major lines in Masonry: the York Rite, the Scottish Rite, and the Ancient Order of the Mystic Shrine. The money that they have definitely doesn't come from that. It comes from holdings, some of which seem to actually go back to the Templars. She said there's a room where future events are on the wall of this room in what amounts to like poster format, like movie posters, like this event, that event. They've had this kind of money under their control for a long time. At least in my lodge, they had the old regalia, so they actually carry a really cool medieval sword. So they're literally guarding the door with the sword. I don't know what is wrong with this person. Like I really felt something I would say I'd never experienced on meeting another person on this earth. Spiritually, I feel he's not in such a good way, Colder, but like the temperature has dropped in this room, Colder. They've researched it extensively, and they're the best in the world at treating burns.